Name sounds familiar.
You need to move over a little bit.
This way?
Or, yeah, a little bit in the frame. Let's see. There you go.
All right.
Good shine on the head.
Yeah. Polish it up. Will it be creepy if I do this?
A little bit. So, where can I see the counter?
On the Procaster.
I'm all out of whack. Where?
On the thing that shows you the chat.
Oh, 4 viewers. This?
4, yeah. No, that's not bad. It's showing me 1. You're live already?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just turned it on because why not? Although that will all be in the recording, won't it? But that's okay.
We have a greeter. Gino, he says hi.
Oh, yeah?
Well, let's start it up. We've got 5 people.
This is the front of the mic? Remember we had that discussion?
Yes.
Yeah, Jose figured that one out.
Okay.
So we'll turn up the audio levels a little bit.
Okay. Turn up the audio.
Actually, don't do anything. We'll do it here.
Okay.
So let's try it out again.
Okay. How's the sound? Is somebody chatting in that it's too quiet? Okay.
Sounds good, people are saying.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, it looks like we've got a few
Right
people.
on.
A few people get ready. So we just want to welcome everybody. This is our Tech Talk, and we're talking. What's the main thing that runs between all big tech trends right now? IoT, cloud, mobile. What's at the center of all those things, Matt?
Well, APIs, obviously.
APIs. So I just want to say, for those of you guys who've been here before, you can tweet your questions using the hashtag Layer7Live. You can send them in the chat, and we will answer them live, or Matt will answer them. You can also email them if you have a kind of a more lengthy, more complicated question, or you just simply can't stick around and wait for your turn for Matt to answer your question. You can email to techtalk@layer7.com, and we'll get those questions answered. Matt's got on the nifty IoT shirt from last month. So we gave these shirts away.
Steve, I was really excited to be here until I found out that I was wearing unfashionable last year's clothes. Although I still love this
But
t-shirt.
This is the official unveiling. Nobody has seen this
Nobody's
shirt
seen
yet.
the shirt.
Nobody
All right,
has
here we
seen
go.
it. So it's IOC. Jose, who's on the other side of the camera, designed this shirt.
It is a very beautiful t-shirt.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you, Jose.
we gave those out to people whose questions we answer. So hopefully you've got those. If you guys are on the line right now watching the stream and you were here last time, hopefully you got your shirt. I know a couple. Carol, if you're here, I know you tweeted a picture, which was awesome. So we've got a new one. We don't have the design prototype, but if you got,
It's exciting though.
But yes, it's very exciting. Jose designed that one too.
So you have to come in next month to see the unveiling in person.
Yeah.
That's right. So you have to come back next month to see the unveiling of this shirt. But if you got the email, or if you've been on our Facebook page, you've seen the graphic. It's an API shirt, and it's got mobile and cloud and IoT and all sorts of things connecting. And so if we answer your question, we'll send you a shirt. So make sure you stick around to hear your answer, and send us in an email with your address and your size. That would be great. So, Matt, what are we going to talk about?
Well, I'd like to introduce myself first of all, because I think I've been a co-host on some of these before.
This is true.
But apparently everyone was on vacation this week, so I'm the featured speaker. No, and actually Mike and Ronnie are on vacation, so I hope they're having a good time. But I actually work closely with Alex Gaber and Mike Amundsen and Ronnie Mitra in the API Academy. So we're working with a lot of companies on their API strategies, on their API architecture and design, and in their API programs in general. And so I just wanted the opportunity to kind of share some of the experiences that we've been having, because it's really cutting across the board now. I think we saw the whole open API concept, web API concept, really grow up on a lot of web-based companies. But now we're seeing it in every industry, in every context. So I think Alex actually had a recent blog post where he's talking about APIs being the toll booth on the information superhighway, and that kind of, I think that's a good opportunity, but just the term information superhighway kind of gives you a flashback to when Al Gore invented the internet. I think it was around like 94, 95, people started talking, before the term internet was really in the mainstream. People were talking about this information superhighway where you would have your whole home connected to all these other data sources. I think there was a envisioning of set-top boxes that would be the hub for how you would connect into all these services across the world. And there would be all these smart devices, and this was when Java was first gaining mainstream popularity, and it was to be embedded in all these devices. So I think it's really interesting that almost 20 years later, we're actually kind of seeing that vision come to fruition. If you look at all the trends and buzzwords that we have to deal with on a daily basis now, we've got, as you said, cloud, mobile driving a lot of new capabilities, being a very tangible thing that we're all addicted to and attached to. Big data may have trumped all buzzwords this year. I don't know if we have any sweepstakes, but I might put my money on big data in the bingo if I had to. Social networks, I think more in a consumer context, but we're also seeing a lot of companies now leveraging some of the techniques of social media and really looking for opportunities to use that. And then what's on the horizon, and I think where maybe the highest buzz to reality ratio would be Internet of Things, because now we're getting into really a point where the connectedness of everything that we have is possible, even if it hasn't fully been implemented yet. So, as we said off the start, there is a role for APIs in all of these different trends. And in fact, the role of the API actually is kind of to bridge all these different things together. So if you have mobile apps, you need APIs in order to get to the back-end cloud-based services. And I think it's, when I work with a lot of mobile companies, I find it kind of amusing, having come from an enterprise context, and I say amusing, more amused at the dogma that we get into in the enterprise world. If you're a mobile app developer, the cloud is just everything that's not on the device. So we think of these very precise definitions around, well, what's private cloud, what's public cloud, what's hybrid cloud. If you're a mobile app developer, you're just like, okay, if it's not on the device, it's in the cloud. I don't care where it is, but I need to use it. And that's the whole point of cloud. But again, APIs are the bridge there. When we get into the Internet of Things and where we really start to see the production of big data, like if we think we have big data now, look out, because I think there was a stat I saw recently that something like all of the information and digital data that we'd produced before 2003 is now produced in a day, something along those lines. It's just the amount of data that's being produced out there. Well, once we start connecting all of our refrigerators and toasters and things to the internet, we're going to have ridiculous amounts of data, which probably has, very small percentages of usefulness, and we're going to have to deal with that. How does that data get produced? Well, it gets produced from these devices through APIs into large systems, and then analyzed and then exposed through APIs for actual practical usage. So all these different things kind of come together. Talking about the history again, about the information superhighway and that whole evolution of the web from that point forward. I find it really interesting now when people are looking at Internet of Things and seeing prototypes. I mentioned the toaster. Like, there literally is a toaster that will print the weather forecast on your toast, so that if you wake up in the morning and you're really tired and you're not sure what to wear, you can put a piece of toast in and it'll come out and say, 18 degrees and rain or something.
Right.
I'm in Vancouver, so that was Celsius. Vancouver. Yeah, that was Celsius. Okay, so for those in the east coast of the U.S., like 120 degrees and muggy, something like that. But anyway, like that, that whole thing is, people are looking at it and saying, oh, all these projections about the IoT creating a multi-trillion-dollar industry, that's preposterous. Well, if we look back to 1995, when we were envisioning this information superhighway, nobody had ever heard of Google. It didn't exist. The thought of bookstores were, it was revolutionary to go into a big box bookstore and buy your books. There was no Amazon.
That's true.
Salesforce.com. I'm not even sure if Siebel was out at that point, but this idea of going and subscribing to software services on a remote network and storing your data there would have been probably thought of as being just as preposterous. But we've actually seen in the last 15 to 20 years these giant companies that are some of the biggest brands in the world now. If you look at top brands in business overall, I think Google was number one in one of the studies that was done recently. This is topping things like Coca-Cola and McDonald's for
Number
brand
one in
recognition.
what? Revenue?
In brand recognition. So if you go around the world,
Yeah.
and you see something, which makes sense now, right? You Google is a verb. It's more than a business; it's a verb.
I think it's made its way.
I think
to LED
I think
as
I
well.
drove by a church the other day and saw some sign on a billboard at the church that said something about Google this, right?
Wow.
So it's out there. So these companies have built massive businesses that are entrenched in our society within the last 15 years and superseded all this kind of market presence that we've seen gone before. And I think now, we're really at a point of convergence in 2013 where that methodology of getting out there and getting that type of embeddability into people's lives is not just for these web-based companies anymore. All companies are looking at how they can go out and get that type of presence, how they can be intertwined in the day-to-day activities that people conduct. That's why mobile is so important, because as much as a computer, a desktop, or a laptop is a business tool, and for a segment of the population, maybe they live their entire lives on it, but for most people, their more and more their normal computing experience is interacting with their mobile device. Mm-hmm. And so if you're a business and you're able to get into that captive audience, it's huge. And the way that now they're studying those companies, and they're looking at Google and Salesforce and Amazon and Facebook and others, Twitter, and saying, how did they do it? How did they get there? And a big part of it is that they're not just looking to offer their commodity services on a website or through other channels. They really have done a great job of using APIs as the core of their business that allows them to integrate and become intertwined into all of those different channels, social media, mobile, and so on. So now we're seeing all these enterprises, they're going and they're looking to copy. Because I think if you're at a bank and you've been going through massive infrastructure, I worked at a bank for 11 years, so I can say this. If you're at a bank and you've done things a certain way and have all these standards and architecture, then you go and you look at what it takes to build high availability in your paradigm. And then you go and use Facebook and you see the more than 1 billion users with frequent interactions and remarkable availability. People start to look at the underlying topology and the architecture and say, how have they done it? What have they done differently? So there's this kind of business avenue that leads towards an API-oriented approach, and there's also technical path that says maybe there's a better architectural approach to how we do these things. So having spent the last 10 years really working with clients deeply on their service-oriented architecture approaches, now seeing them pivot into the API world, I think we're seeing the open web and the enterprise world come together, and it's a really interesting time to be ready to service all these trends. Cool. So that was my brief preamble on what we're here to talk about today. I know we have quite a few questions.
We do have lots of questions, so I think we'll just dive right in if you're okay with
Sure.
that. And then if some of the questions may not be exactly appropriate for this, this kind of forum, like if they're really specific Layer 7 product questions, we might not answer them because it's not necessarily the spirit of the chat. It's a Q&A, but not necessarily all about Layer 7 products. So, but we will answer those questions offline. So if you've asked real specific sort of Layer 7 functionality, gateway functionality stuff, we may not get to it today. But thanks for those questions. But we'll get the answers to you for sure.
In other words, we're afraid of what I might say. But no, I'm kidding.
So we've seen your questions in the chat. I see GH Chinoy, Barry Hudson, it looks like. So I'm gonna start off with a couple of questions that we got through email just the other day, I guess yesterday. And Guillermo Todd, hopefully you're here too, because I know you tweeted a couple of questions yesterday. So first question looks like it's from Niranjan. Sorry if I'm killing your names. And hopefully you're here on the line. Are IoT integrations so far majorly P2P, considering the diversity of protocols and endpoints? Are there ESBs which currently exist with the capacity to scale on the web?
Okay, good. IoT question right off the bat. Let's look ahead. And it's a great question. So I think that we're really at a tipping point. I think, okay, I'm stealing this because I read a study on M2M yesterday, which used that word. I can't get it out of
Tipping
my head.
point?
Tipping point. It's a good book. So for IoT specifically, for M2M, I think it is interesting. When I first was getting into the whole Internet of Things space, that wasn't the buzz term. It was machine to machine, M2M. And I think maybe the reason that buzz term changed is because M2M really doesn't catch the essence of what it does. So machine to machine kind of implies that you're connecting devices to devices, and that really isn't where the value proposition is. As I pointed out, I think the value proposition of the whole Internet of Things space is to collect the data from these points. So it's really more like machine to intelligent system. So, but it is a very interesting point. If you look at this from the device perspective, and you've got that toaster, and you're trying to connect in and provide the information, how do you do that? There are some very specialized protocols out there. And I think on Holger's Tech Talk last time, we went into some of the details around that. Because of where we are at a very early stage, there are a number of competing protocols around what's going to be, if anything, what will be the mainstream protocol for communicating information from devices into other endpoints. We're seeing a lot of REST-based use cases, but they're probably more of the emerging ones. There are some more commoditized protocols like XMPP, which is more of a chat protocol. We're seeing that used quite a bit for device connectivity. Also, MQTT is IBM created it and then open sourced it, is a lightweight protocol for doing pub/sub of information. And there are others. So the network topology as it stands today for IoT is pretty complex because there have been a lot of niche providers that are out there who specifically provide full service connectivity for devices. They will work with large industry clients. Let's say you've got a healthcare company and they want to put in device connectivity. They'll go to one of these network providers, buy a service which will get them a bunch of managed devices on a network, and then they'll feed that information into that healthcare company's systems. And it could be healthcare, it could be telco, it could be other things. So you'll see a lot of carriers getting into that business. You'll see some other providers like Sierra Wireless is a Vancouver-based company that does that. I like to plug my hometown teams. But they're in that business. I do believe that there will be more of a standardization of protocols, and that the protocol and network communication will become more commoditized. So, but I wouldn't even characterize what they're doing today as P2P, because it is multiple endpoints consolidated into multiple back-end systems. ESB as a concept in the IoT space is interesting because it's kind of, I think we use ESB as a technology component, but it can be kind of an architectural concept as well. So will there be a hub concept for IoT? I think there already is in those network providers, but I think you'll see the control of that hub move back towards the actual companies that source the data. So I think in the IoT space, there's a very strong linkage to what's happening with big data, because I think the data itself becomes the golden asset. I think can't remember where I saw a debate recently, there was some debate around, user experience is everything, owning the client interaction is everything, but I don't agree with that. I think that's important, but I think that data will become more and more precious and complex. If we look at some other IoT examples like smart meter, we've got really complex data ownership issues in the smart grid. If you are a user of, if you've got a smart meter in your home, you've now gone from a very opaque monitoring system where if there's a power outage, you have to phone the power company and tell them, to a system now where they can track extremely granular data about your power consumption and give you more granular control over that consumption. But what that means is, if you can tell when I'm using my appliances, when the TV's on, when the dryer's on, you can tell when I'm home, and you can tell when I'm not home, and that becomes a security issue and a privacy issue. So you end up with this situation where you've got multiple owners of data, and sometimes the people storing the data don't own the data. So you get into these complex ownership issues. So we envision kind of an integration problem with sourcing data and exposing data. But even beyond that, we see some value in providing a hub for data in the IoT context that will allow you to deal with complex security policies. And so if you're familiar at all with our data lens solution, that's the whole essence of that concept, is that with all this data that's flowing out there and all the data that's being stored and the complexity around ownership and usage of the data, we feel like the policies that will be required to actually expose the data, the complexity will be as much on the security side as it will be on the integration side. And so we are really, already today providing a solution around that. And we think that as we get more and more adoption of that solution, we'll see it more refined. So I wouldn't say there will be an ESB in the IoT context, but there will certainly be this kind of big data hub, which will require both protocol handling as well as policy enforcement.
We've got sort of a follow-up question or a comment in the chat too. GH Chinoy, sorry. Is the API gateway the new or the replacement for the heavyweight ESB?
Yeah, I guess that's sort of linked, but that goes across all of API context. So I would say that if you built your ESB the right way, and I'm very opinionated on this one, then you're already exposing APIs in the right way. I think that ESB and SOA go hand in hand. I implemented an ESB at the bank where I started out. I worked for 5 years at IBM as the kind of leader on the pre-sale side for ESBs, and I've been working with a lot of clients now on their ESB concepts. ESB, like every other buzz term that I've said today, is an overloaded term. Okay. Some people think they buy an ESB, it's a piece of technology. Some people architect an ESB as a kind of a true shared service endpoint that they use to abstract service invocations. So I believe that the plumbing that's put in place with the true ESB implementation, if you've gone and truly exposed shared services to your enterprise, if you have cataloged those, and if you've done it in a way that allows you to developers to understand how to utilize them, then you're already a long way down the API path. I think that the difference is, in a lot of my ESB experiences, it was the way that it was rolled out in the enterprise was really architect-driven, enterprise-driven, and a lot of times you had to drag developers kicking and screaming to buy into the whole SOA program. I think what really changes more with an API-oriented approach is we're really out to spoil the developers. We want to give the developers all the tools at their fingertips in a self-service way, and so that they can go in and understand how to use APIs. That's where the API portal concept really comes in, and this is where a great example of copying the proven pattern in the open web world. If you're going to handle multiple developers and you don't know who those developers are, you have to give them the methods to subscribe to it and register for it and so on. So I think that's the big difference, is more focusing on the carrot than the stick. Don't punish the developers for not following the thing that you're forcing on them. Give them the right tools and they'll follow the approach the right way. But from a technical perspective, if you've gone and done your ESB in the right way, then you're well positioned for an API program. Having said that, I would say probably the majority of the ESB implementations that I've seen are just, let's go solve an integration problem with a new piece of technology. And a lot of times that didn't change the approach, and maybe it wasn't focused on shared services, and it was more of a point-to-point connectivity thing. So really it comes down to your definition of the ESB and then how you use it.
Okay, lots of questions.
Good.
Yeah. So thanks for that one. Naranjan, hopefully I'm not ruining your name. I know you're there, so thanks for chatting in. Guillermo Todd, hopefully you're here. We're going to answer your 2 questions that you sent in through Twitter. How do you ensure quality, stability, and performance in a world of quick provisioning of APIs?
Hey, Guillermo. Nice to chat. Yes, great question. So, I think that there's certainly having an API platform in place, product plug, but it's true, is a great way to attack this problem. But I think also having a very conscious focus on what are the services that you're providing through those APIs is fundamental. I think that if we look back in time and look at an enterprise approach to that, we would say a lot of times the reason that we ended up in the situation we're in, where we've got specific interfaces for specific clients, which leads to the integration spaghetti that we're trying to get away from. A lot of the reason for that was to isolate and provide stability. I think that the approach that we're promoting is really to, first of all, get ahead of the curve on the architecture, understand what are the components that are going to be utilized the most, how can you abstract those components so that you can deliver them in a consistent framework, and what are the right approaches to versioning and so on. And I know you're familiar, Guillermo, with kind of our school of thought around that. But I think that I've always been a big believer that what you want to do with clients is give them only the information that they need. I think that one of the main principles that we profess in the API Academy is that if you try and just start with the data and work from the back forward and just dump everything that's there out to the clients, you're going to get in trouble, because it's not so much the client that's coming on new that you're worried about. It's all the clients that are already using things. And so if you've got an API, let's say, that is widely used by a number of clients, you don't want to have one. Let's say you have a new client, but they need one extra element. You don't want to end up in a situation where you have to add one element and create a ripple effect of change on every other client that's using the API. So, utilizing hypermedia approaches, more of a guided self-discovery approach, and utilizing filtering capabilities within your platform to ensure that clients are only getting the data that they need, and therefore isolating them from potential change impacts down the road. Those are a couple of techniques. But I think I would just say it's one of the main considerations you have to look at in your environment, is to say, what's the rate at which we want to introduce change? I think I know I'm running on a lot of these questions, but there is one very important point to emphasize around what I meant by the platform in terms of handling that approach. If you can really separate the content and metadata that's associated with the individual APIs that you're producing, so in other words, specific formats, if you're doing checks on particular data and looking for relationships between data and so on, that type of content-heavy approach, if you can separate that from the actual infrastructure services, like protocol handling and some of the frameworks that you're going to be putting in place for the platform, you'll find that the content is quite fluid in terms of what changes, whereas the infrastructure components change a lot less frequently. The less you touch the infrastructure and the plumbing, the more stable your environment's going to be. And so it's kind of like in the web world where you've got content management systems, but then you've got the actual application infrastructure. If you can get that level of separation in your API platform, which we do with our clients, then you go a long way to solving that issue as well.
I think the long answers are good too because you're touching on some of the other questions as well.
Good.
So
everybody gets a shirt.
Everybody? No, not everybody. Yeah, and now tell me if you've touched on this because you talked about big data earlier, but Guillermo's second question was APIs seem to obey structure; they follow a structure, while big data doesn't. So, what API strategy is used most against big data?
Yeah, so that I hinted at it. I wouldn't say I covered it.
Yeah.
So it's a great point. I think the whole the whole point of big data is that it can be unstructured. But being another overloaded buzz term, people can see big data on a presentation and a lot of fluff behind it, and then they can go and say, I've got a really big database, so I have a big data problem. But anyway, the essence of big data is that you've got very fluid movement of data through the enterprise, and it's not so much the structure or the size of the data where the payoff comes. It's really around accessing it in real time. So we've got all this data that's out there, but now we have the tools to be able to actually not only capture that data in real time, but analyze it and then immediately reflect it into real-time business processes. So, but I think it's a great point that you're not just going to take that data and reflect it back in its raw form out there in the API. I think a couple things. First of all, one of the other differences I would say between the API approach and the enterprise integration SOA type approach is we have to assume in the API world that we don't constrain the actual payloads of the APIs as much as we did in the kind of XML-oriented world. I mean, XML is great for structuring data, so is JSON, but in the API world, we can deal with all sorts of different content types. And so all the different media types that we're dealing with, we have to be able to support them. And the whole REST approach is perfectly built for that because it's built on top of the HTTP framework, which handles multiple content types. So I think a couple things. First of all, when you're building out APIs and exposing those, you should, whether they're business functionality behind them, whether it's a business application that's performing logic, or whether it's just a way of exposing data quickly, I do believe that you still need to put some emphasis on designing the API because the whole value of the API is going to come from how well you've articulated it to the users. It has to be user-oriented so that they know how to use it and there's an uptake. Doesn't matter how much great data you're providing if nobody knows how to use it. But at the same time, I think we do have more flexibility using the REST-based approach for handling multiple content types if required. So I wouldn't just automatically dump the data back to the consumers, but I think that if you go through a conscious approach and say, here's the APIs that we want to expose that we think are good for our users, here's how we've made them very usable, then if you need to put in unstructured formats and so on, it's facilitated much better through the REST-based approach than through a SOAP-based approach.
Good. So I know we had some REST questions too, so maybe the answers to those questions were in there. I'm going to answer, because I'm pretty sure I see Terry Yoder on the line from Minitab. He's got kind of a question about small business, I guess. Right now, there are limited options from home hobbyists who want to connect their physical things to the internet and have some kind of security policy so that they can be accessible or addressable publicly, but only to certain users. Will Layer 7 look to get into this market? Personal security gateways? Probably not, but are there solutions already on the market for that kind of
Terry,
scenario?
I saw your question ahead of time. It's a great question. It actually folds very well into the whole information superhighway discussion, because I think that was the home of the future concept. So layer 7 won't be, but I will personally be doing a startup to get into that. But no, I'm kidding.
There's an opportunity there, but it's not really layer 7's.
Well, I think that, I think we have to look at, today probably there are some of us, probably a lot of us, who already through their cable company or phone company, right, have got into this converged space around, okay, now my TV and phone and
Smart
cable
meter
are all delivered through one hub. Yeah, I don't know if the smart meter is probably going a different network, but you can definitely see where everything's going to line up, right? And we probably have a lot of devices on the Wi-Fi and so on. So I agree with you. I think that there's definitely going to be a need for consistency around how you handle security policies. Right now, home hobbyists are, or general consumers are more users of services, so it's more like they need to go into the web and find things. But I think you're talking about, what if we start exposing services from our own homes that can be utilized out there by other users? So I think that, I think it's a really interesting idea. I think what we'd have to see is, what's the whole business model for that? So what does it look like in terms of the security policies that are going to be required? What types of access control models are you going to be using? Is it just a matter of the safety that you need to expose a static IP with hosting your services on the internet? Are you going to look to have your own user base, or are you going to look to utilize, sign into your home-based service through Facebook, something along those lines? I think it's a great industry to track. We don't have any near-term plans in that market, but would certainly be interested in talking to you offline about some of the real life use cases that you'd envision, and do more thinking about how it would play out.
Yeah, so Terry, if you want to, if you can send your, we've answered your question, so we're going to send you a shirt. So use the techtalk@layer7.com email, and if you want to follow up with the question, maybe Matt can, follow up through that email. But make sure you send us your address if you haven't already, and we'll definitely.
I think Terry, just follow. I'm seeing the follow up on the chat there. So I think I was probably going a level too high. I think you're looking even for, how do you make your own data sources, whether it's sensors, actuators, and so on, things that are really getting into the smart device market. How do you make those addressable and make those integratable, and probably, almost a community-based approach. So we're already participating in that with our smart meters, but now what if you want to be an endpoint for some community? This is kind of social meets IoT, which is a really interesting space. So yeah, I definitely some interesting ideas around that. You may be onto the next big thing there. So let's see. We'll see.
Okay, we're gonna have to go quickly, a little bit more quickly, I think, because we're running out of time. People don't have all morning.
Okay.
But so Kevin Paddock asks, what kind of transaction monitoring / reporting alerting does your product include? So I'm not sure how detailed in terms of a product question, but
yeah, let me see if I can spin this into the topic. It's a good question. I think a lot of the reason that we're in this space, the reason why I think a generic value proposition for what we do with our API management suite is, if you think about the way that all of these systems interact with each other, so you've got all these smart devices and so on. If you think of the world where you just have isolated components exposing APIs, or isolated devices connecting to APIs, it becomes pretty chaotic quickly. So a big value proposition of what our gateway does in the context of APIs is consolidation. It's just a central point where information is flowing through, and it's very fast, it's very optimized, which allows us to inspect things. So in the case of smart meter, if you're collecting all these events from multiple sources, we can actually consolidate that information, or we can look at patterns of information to kick off business events. So there's a whole whack of different ways that we can either just log what's happening on the gateway, or what's happening in the traffic flowing through the gateway, or even roll up and correlate different messages and events to build more complex events that can be used to trigger things like exception handling processes and so on. So, having been in the enterprise space for more than 10 years with our gateway and dealt with all the complexities that you'll get in big industries, we take a plug and play approach, and we're not prescriptive around how we log things. We look at how you in the enterprise log things so that we can plug into your existing systems and feed them in a way where we're providing some intelligence and consolidation in the context of that integration.
Perfect. So thanks for that question. Hopefully you're on the line. Let's see, James Pascal, he's got 2, so I'll just fire them off. What percentage of APIs do you think will be RESTful, and how will it affect API management?
What percentage of APIs will be RESTful? So that's an interesting question. I can say this, I'm seeing now, this is from somebody who, when I was at the bank 10 years ago, wrote a SOAP interface to some shared banking systems on it, running on a HP nonstop platform. So I was getting wackily into the SOAP world, but we're past the tipping point. There we go again with the SOAP to REST. The big enterprises that we're talking with, I think everybody gets now why a REST-oriented approach it trumps the SOAP approach. Not to say you can't use SOAP services; they certainly have their usage. But we're seeing on the open web, at least, the majority of APIs have already gone REST. So I would expect that for what we consider to be shared enterprise services inside or outside the enterprise, you will see at least they'll be offered along with SOAP services, and in most cases they'll probably only be offered as REST-based services. On the open web, it's already there. And then I think the big question may be around REST for Internet of Things. So in the IoT world, how many of those APIs are going to be REST-oriented? Well, we're already seeing that once you get past the managed networks and managed services around providing the direct device connectivity, that once you get to that point where you've collected the data and you're now sourcing it into the enterprise systems, or those enterprise systems are integrated into the managed network providers' systems where they've collected the data, you're already seeing REST being the first language of choice or protocol of choice in that context. And so, I think that, as I said before, as things get more commoditized in that paradigm, you're going to see more and more REST-based communication into the enterprise systems. And I think that I don't see any reason why we can't get into more and more REST-based connectivity directly from the client's devices themselves.
How about REST versus JSON? Somebody's asking, sort of following up.
Well, I guess REST versus, there's two different things, right? REST and SOAP are the formats, protocols that you would compare, whereas JSON and XML are usually the ones that go off against each other. So REST XML based versus REST JSON based, again, in a mobile context, it's interesting. Like JSON is just, again, that's the native tongue. If you're doing mobile apps, then you're going to be doing REST APIs with JSON formats and probably OAuth to handle the security credentials.
Right.
So that's definitely the way it's shifting as well. But obviously, there's still a big place for XML because of when you do want very prescriptive data, when you do want cross-validation of elements, and when you're doing very complex data handling, it's still a very useful data format.
Okay. Just wanted to remind everybody that we're going to try to get to your questions. If you can stick around for another 15 minutes, hopefully Matt can stay for another 15 minutes or so.
For 15 minutes. I think we should probably notify the warehouse that they're going to need more T-shirts.
Sorry, just one sec. I just wanted to catch the name, but I think I didn't. So sorry, this is your question. Make sure you send an email to techtalk@layer7.com because I forgot to note down the name or the username. What is the difference between a router and a Layer 7 device? Behind the scenes, my Tomcat or JBoss hosts my web API. Actually, I think that's Barry.
Okay.
So
Good.
does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So say you have an API today and you've got some reverse proxy that's just exposing that to the outside world. Well, there's a lot of differences between a Layer 7 device and a router. And I think you will see this soon. So, we've got our gateway, which I think is what you're referring to, is really can be used in multiple proxy contexts for API integration. Probably the most typical case would be the reverse proxy in the DMZ Canadian that handles the communication from API clients inbound into the applications that are hosting the API endpoint. So it does a lot more. So you can do security policy enforcement, you can do protocol handling, and it's all done using a configuration-based approach rather than hosting code. When you see we have a policy manager that allows you to configure flows anywhere from, I just need to terminate the SSL into I need to extract the OAuth token and do validation, or perhaps extract credentials and do authentication and create tokens. I need to transform formats like the previous question. I need to expose JSON to this mobile app, but I need to transform it into SOAP and XML on the back end. So there's a lot it can do. It is a fully functioning application component in the architecture, and hence the name Layer 7, which is part of the application level of the OSI stack. So that's just a precursor to answering the question. But Terry, Barry.
I think it's Barry.
Barry, you'll see a whole lot more than that. I think we're coming to see you guys in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. Now this question.
Oh, I like that one.
Which one?
12.
12 was from, I forget, maybe it was Jim. I'm sorry, I forgot to note down the name on this one too. Do you believe that everything that has an identity will someday have an API?
Great question. I wanted to talk about identity because I alluded this to a bit around the discussion on the complexity of data ownership in the IoT world.
It's Jim. I don't know
Okay,
his last name,
Jim.
but Jim, if you're still here.
Good question.
Good question.
So I might even change this question a bit. You're saying, will everything that has an identity someday have an API?
Right.
Well, I think that, that possibly. I think that there was an article recently, or there's a startup, they're talking about having a human API. I think I may have tweeted that one, Steve. I don't know if you saw it. And
I did.
It said, I'm afraid of if there's a human API, I'm really worried about what kind of sensors we're going to have to build into our products to try and get information about that. Anyway, but yeah, I think it's quite possible. In other words, anything that is a source of information could have an API. I think another way to shift the question around though is as well, what are the types of identities that we have in play in this IoT world, and how does that affect APIs? So if we look at APIs as the point at which you have an opportunity to control access into a service. So this is the place where we're serving up the data. It's the place where we can enforce policies around who's requesting it, who owns it, who's providing it, and all that. I think that we've got some really interesting challenges ahead of us. So one of the unique aspects of the smart device world is that probably for the first time we've got robotic type devices that are producing data without any sort of human interaction. A lot of the integration challenges we've solved in the past have been, even if it's a server making the request into the API, or if it's a mobile app making the request in the API, it's user triggered. It's a human being that's initiating the process. And so they need to be checked in terms of who it is, what their access rights are. But now we've got, even in the mobile context, we have things like who is it and what device are they using? Are they allowed to see this data based on who they are and what device they're using? And mobile, we even get into some other things like who is it, what device are they using, where are they? Because we have some geofencing policies that we can put in place in our mobile access gateway that allows us to say, okay, if you're at work, you can look at it, but you can't look at it when you're at home, right? Now we get in the IoT space, and it's what is it that's accessing this data or sourcing this data?
Right.
What are they allowed to provide? So I think identity and the whole API context that will be explosive with IoT is one of the main things that we should be looking at. And I think it's a big part of our focus, particularly around IoT and the data lens concept that we've got out there. And was there a
little bit of a kind of an exchange between
okay.
Jim and Terry Oder?
Right.
Do you think that this will all lead to event networks?
Yeah, so I think that definitely what happens in the IoT world, based on the fact that it's not human-controlled devices, and it's much more asynchronous in terms of devices providing blips of data at points in time, and then having to react to that, and react not only to that, but react to the collection of events that happen, and trying to make sense of a series of complex events that might happen. Yeah, I think that we've already, again, in some advanced environments where they've really gone out and become service-oriented or API-oriented, we're already seeing more of a, kind of this model of all the services and APIs that are just read-only and just query type, as well as all those that change state. But then the post-state change services, which we could collectively call events, definitely. Something happened, right? The first one is, what are all the things that have happened? The next one is, this just happened, and so you need to do something about it. And then the final one is, okay, what just happened and how does it affect me? So yeah, I think that you'll see much more event-oriented thinking around how systems interact with each other.
Cool. That's such an interesting
And then
topic.
Skynet will achieve consciousness, or whatever the term was, and then we're all doomed.
Going back, this is an early question that we wait for. I'm not exactly what I say, but I think it's the Chinoi, GH Chinoi. Pretty sure that's your question. How does one establish, monitor, and provide QoS, SLA?
Quality service and
Quality service, SLA for disparate cloud APIs. What are the big data techniques for assessing critical functionality for chained API functionality?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think let's talk about cloud.
Hussein, of course. You're a friend of the Tech Talks. Sorry about that.
So Hussein, this is, I think,
make sure you send your address too. So you can
I think you're ahead of the curve here, which is good. We've seen a lot of reticence on the part of companies adopting cloud-based services around data privacy. So they're worried about, what happens if I put my data in the cloud, who has access to it, and so on. Legitimate concerns, but really, I think, very well solved by the cloud vendors that are out there, in spite of maybe some recent political news stories that have got everyone shaking in their boots and have individuals flying from Hong Kong to Moscow and so on. But anyway, I don't want to name names because I might be being watched right now. But so there's a lot of concern around data security in the cloud. But I know, having worked very closely with Amazon and other cloud providers, like, they've got solutions there. In fact, I would argue that because there's been so much focus put on it, it's probably better solved than a lot of internally hosted data sources and the security there. But I think the next big challenge around cloud is around how do you manage availability, because we've seen a lot of publicity around some big outages in cloud providers that have affected multiple companies. And I think that if you're a company that is moving your services to the cloud, a lot of times the driver for that is you may have overflow of processing need. Best Buy is one of our big clients, and they on Black Friday, which is the biggest shopping day in the U.S., they need excess capacity, and it just didn't make sense to try and provision all that internal infrastructure in order to service one day and then leave a lot of it idle for the rest of the year. So they use cloud-based services to do their overflow processing. But once you overflow and you get into a more complex model of providing your services, you need to be sure that you've got the availability. And I'm not putting this on the cloud providers. I think a lot of the publicity around the Amazon outages were as much the fault of the companies that were engineering their solutions in Amazon and not following the published best practices around multiple availability zones and so on. But once you move things into the cloud, you need to be able to balance the traffic and maintain high quality of service and service levels. So we've gotten into this with some of our bigger clients where we have some, I think, really interesting dynamic routing capability in our gateways that if you use it as a forward proxy into your cloud-based services, you can actually monitor, and this applies not just for external cloud services, but for any internal private clouds, anywhere where you've virtualized your backends and you have multiple instances. We have some functionality that allows you to, I think we called it API-aware traffic control or API-aware traffic management, which I don't think you'll find that in our brochures. That's more the architectural term we've been using. But it actually understands the health of the instances in your backend, whether they're in the public cloud or in a private cloud or just in your infrastructure, and allows you in real time to detect the health so that you can proactively manage the service levels, route away from instances. Because those of us who know enterprise computing, if you have a sick instance that isn't down but it's going there, that could be worse than just having a hard down, because you'll start getting sporadic response times, you get thread buildups, and everything can explode even before a back-end system goes down. So we have a way of managing that I think is extremely powerful. Not only that, but in the cloud context would then allow you to take action by doing things like calling out to the cloud provider's APIs and provisioning new instances of the application or new instances of the gateway or whatever infrastructure components you need to meet the scale overflow.
Right. Holger, thanks. He's sharing an article there in the chat on IoT data models. So thanks, Holger.
Cool.
Let's blast through. We've got a few more minutes. Stick with us. And the answer to your question is probably coming up. Looks like Hussein's got a few questions. The API abstraction seems to be more understandable for the concepts that ESBs were trying to get to for SOA.
Yeah,
kind of
so
talked about that earlier, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good. I think that's a great point. So I think SOA is, again, it's not a bunch of technologies, right? It's an approach to how do you architect services in your environment that are reusable and can be leveraged across multiple lines of business, multiple business processes, and so on. Certainly that's the case with APIs. And in terms of whether, as I said before, I think if you followed that approach and did things what I would call the right way for SOA, you're very well positioned to expose things through APIs and really, SOAP is a type of API anyway, but I think that what makes it better I think we're on the same page with this one, is that taking an incentive-oriented approach and saying, we're going to focus on the consumers as opposed to punishing the consumers, right? The developers that are out there actually building apps and other components that utilize these APIs and services, spoiling them, giving them the tools they need to follow the right path, it results in more of them actually using the services than, let's say, a heavyweight governance process that says thou shalt use these APIs or interfaces that maybe aren't very developer friendly. So I agree with you on that point.
Okay. Another one from Hussein. What do you see as the crucial metadata to collect about APIs that need to be collected for big data analysis? Big data is a big theme today.
As well it should be. So what do you see the crucial metadata to collect about APIs? I think that the metadata for APIs always should follow the actual intended business purpose. So I think that the value proposition that comes from delivering things through an API as opposed to just a data interface is in how you can interpret the data for use by the end client. So I would say, when we're working through individual interactions, it is a bit of a complex process, but you need to go across. Okay, let's say you're starting from the back end. So let's say, I think, which is what you're getting at. Say you just have a bunch of data now. Okay, that's great. But then really going through how it's going to be used, especially how it's going to be reused, will guide you towards building a strong API. The process that we use in our API Academy workshops is to bring in all the stakeholders. So, and for each of those stakeholders, they may have their own pieces of metadata or information that's important to them. And we like to especially bring in the end clients to test out what we're providing. And in fact, in a couple of recent workshops that we've delivered, what we're actually doing is reversing the perspective and taking people who are building APIs and putting them in the seat of the developer who's building apps that actually use those APIs. So there are, I think it's a pretty deep topic, and I know we're probably out of time, but I'd like to talk to you about what are the goals, what are the data that you have, what are the goals for your actual usage of that data, and then kind of work through that those multiple perspectives to determine what is the right metadata that's going to be most important.
Okay, I think we'll probably just get to this last question from John, and I think we've pretty much answered all of it. We did have a question from Italy, which was awesome, but it was more of a, where did it go? More of a product specific. So if Pierre, Luigi, if you're here, just quickly, are you planning to provide a marketplace component to your API management solution?
Right. I saw that one.
Yeah.
I think I know where it comes from.
Yeah.
One of our competitors, I think, launched a marketplace.
I see.
That may be where it's coming from. But
yeah.
So I think that if we look at what is a marketplace, right? I look at any time that somebody puts a developer portal out there on the open web is a marketplace in its own. We see other, what you might call API marketplaces, like what Programmable Web has in terms of a registry of APIs, but a lot of that just points back to the actual developer portal.
Right.
So, when you think about a marketplace, there's probably a few steps involved. How do I find what I'm looking for? And then once I've found it, how do I actually buy the goods? So, I think our approach is we don't want to be prescriptive to our clients. We want to be enablers, and we want to empower our clients. So we give them a tool set with our technology, and we help to provide experience through our API Academy consulting. And if there's, I personally think that generic API marketplaces aren't really that relevant, because it's not like people are looking for APIs to begin with. What they're looking for are business services that fit their business goals. And so APIs are a big part of that, but it's probably more relevant to have domain-specific marketplaces, and maybe better coming from a company who's already a shared service provider in that business. Certainly we have tools that allow you to connect to the mainstream APIs easily. But like I said, I think our approach is to really empower the companies that we work with to meet their business goals. And if it means them providing a marketplace of APIs that have a common link, then we can certainly participate in that.
Cool. And Hussein, thanks for all the questions. Don't be sorry. The whole point of the Tech Talk is to ask as many questions as you can. So
I want to be the one delivering the next Tech Talk anyway, so I can get the next T-shirt. They're sold.
Yeah, the next
awesome.
The next T-shirt is really cool. So be sure to send in your address, your mailing address, to the techtalk@layer7.com email. If you don't send your address, we're not going to hunt it down. So we want to send the shirt, so send in that email. I just wanted to mention quickly that Matt has talked a lot about the API Academy. So if you guys don't know, you can
Call me. No.
Yeah.
No weeds.
We've got a website dedicated to it. It's apiacademy.co. You can navigate it from the Layer 7 website as well. We've got the API Academy menu tab at the top. We've got a Twitter handle, which is literally at API Academy. And the Academy is basically, the mandate is how to build good APIs, how to design good APIs. So there's Matt, there's Mike Amundsen, there is Ronnie Mitra, and we hold API Academy workshops all throughout the world, actually.
Yep.
So we're in the US, we're in Chicago in July, so if you're in that area, drop us a line and find out how you can get there. There's a couple in Australia in July. We've been in New York, Atlanta, so we're going to be in Toronto in the first week of August, I think. So keep your eye out for the API Academy workshops. They could be coming to a city near you. We did one in Seattle, so maybe Guillermo was there. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure if you guys weren't familiar with what the Academy is, that's how you can find out. apiacademy.co. Thanks everybody for your questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you,
for
Steve.
staying overtime. And stay tuned. We'll have another one. And don't forget to send in those addresses so I can mail you out your shirts. They're cool.
They are.
Thank you.
Thanks.